You're listening to The Agenda. This is Katie Chambers on Dubai 103.8. I'm filling in for Georgia this week. She's off on holiday with her family. And I've got a question for you. Maybe you're a bit of an aviation enthusiast, but would you know, by the sound of it, what plane this is? Still quite loud, isn't it? I'll give you a clue. It was loud, also expensive, and was retired in 2003. Do you know what it is yet? I think if you know anything about planes, you'll know that I'm speaking about the Concorde, and that was the sleek, needle-nosed aircraft that could fly passengers from London to New York in under 3.5 hours. Now, it has been retired since 2003, but after 2 decades on the ground, supersonic air travel is trying to make a comeback. We've got several companies that are racing to bring it back. One of the most talked about is a US company called Boom Supersonic. They're developing an aircraft called the Overture, which they say could fly at nearly twice the speed of today's commercial planes. And it all sounds super exciting. I have to say my only experience on a Concorde aircraft is in the museum in Filton in Bristol in the United Kingdom, where you get to look at where the pilot used to sit through a glass panel. But how close are we really to stepping back on board a supersonic jet? Well, I'm delighted to say I'm joined by Dr. Chris James, who's a senior lecturer at the Centre for Hypersonics at the University of Queensland in Australia. And hopefully you can help us separate fact from fiction here, Dr. James. Let's start with the basics. How realistic is this of bringing back supersonic passenger jets?
Yeah, good question, Katie. Nice to be here with you. I guess you started with the Concorde, so it shows it's obviously possible because the Concorde existed in the past and it showed that this was possible. I think the hard part was the Concorde was very, very expensive. So and they had the support of the British government and the French government, whereas companies like Boom Supersonic, they're hoping to do this privately. So whether a private company can do this, I'm unsure about that. But I guess because Concorde showed it was possible, it is physically possible. So it'll be interesting to see how things develop for them over the coming years.
And you mentioned Boom Supersonic there, one of the main companies working on this. What makes their aircraft different from Concorde?
Yeah, that's a good question. In many ways, it's quite similar. You look at the photo of their Overture, supersonic airliner, it looks almost the same, right? The shape, because I think the aerodynamics and the physics really push you to a certain type of looking geometry. But I think what they're hoping for is several things. Concorde was designed basically almost by hand, I guess, with basic modeling. It used aluminium, which is 3 times lighter than steel, and most planes are made of aluminium, but it's not an advanced material like carbon fiber. So I think they're hoping with modern materials and modern design techniques, they can make a more efficient aircraft, which will make this possible, I guess, which was potentially not possible historically.
And Concorde, like you said, was fast, but also very loud and expensive and not particularly fuel efficient. How are the newer designs today trying to fix those problems?
Yeah, I think, like you said, that's the hardest thing is the noise. And so I think starting like you did with the Concorde noise is very important because that was the big problem, right? For Concorde, they originally wanted to fly it pretty much everywhere. And then they were told, well, your sonic boom's so loud, you can't fly this over land. And then when they first started, they weren't even allowed to take off from New York City because it was so loud at landing, so loud at taking off. They eventually got that removed, obviously. So there's several ways they're trying to deal with this. So the first thing was that weight thing, right? If you can make a plane out of lighter materials, then it takes less energy, less fuel to accelerate up to those supersonic speeds. And you can hopefully do everything with less fuel and do it cheaper, right? So that's the first thing. The second thing is trying to make that sonic boom less. So Boom, personally, they're not trying to get to the point that they can fly supersonically over land. I think they are aiming for a much lighter, not such quieter plane. They do claim that they will have takeoff noise that's no louder than any other current aircraft, like a 787, something like that. But they will cruise over land at Mach 0.94, so close to the speed of sound, faster than a passenger jet like a 787 Boeing that might fly at Mach 0.8 or something like that. So slightly faster, but not supersonic.
Okie dokie. And pardon my ignorance, because I'm not an expert, even though I do love planes. Will this new plane by Boom be faster than the Concorde? How does it compare speed-wise?
Yeah, that's a good question. It will actually be slightly slower. So Concorde was Mark 2. Boom Supersonic are planning for Mark 1.8. I'm not 100% sure why they chose that exact speed over the Mark 2. Generally, the faster you go, the hotter everything gets, because you have a stronger shock wave. Behind that, the gases are hotter. Like originally, when the US wanted to do supersonic travel like 50 years ago, they tried for Mark 3, and that required a fully titanium plane that ended up just not being feasible when they cancelled it, right? Whereas Concorde, they went the fastest they could possibly go while still using an aerospace grade aluminium frame.
Okie dokie. I think I've got that worked out in my head now. You did mention the word supersonic earlier.
Yeah.
To hypersonic speeds, I just want to unpick a little bit. I mean, that's five times the speed of sound. Could we go beyond supersonic to hypersonic? What would that mean for travel times if this is possible?
Yeah, so basically, as your Mach number doubles, your speed doubles, right? So you're traveling at Mach 0.8, like a 787, then you're traveling at Concorde at Mach 2, you're going 2.5 times as fast, you get there 2.5 times faster, roughly, right? So you've got to speed up when you take off. If you're traveling at Mach 5, for example, then you're going even more than twice as fast again, right? So that would be great, like if we could do that. But the problem with hypersonic flight is you need so much more fuel and energy to get up to those speeds, and then you need to slow down from those speeds. So there's only ever been one plane really that's flown hypersonically. NASA tested the X-15 in like the 60s, and that was essentially just a guy strapped to a rocket. So it was like a little cockpit with a rocket behind him, and they flew him up to space. They got up to about Mach 7 or Mach 8. So yeah, I don't think that would necessarily, some people do talk about ideas like this. I'm not sure I personally believe it's realistic for a passenger jet, but I certainly think something supersonic could be, because it has been, obviously.
I was going to say, a hypersonic, how would that feel as a passenger?
Yeah, I think it wouldn't feel too good. Like anyone who's seen, there's the movie The First Man. Like Neil Armstrong was an X-15 test pilot. The start of that movie starts with a flight test of the X-15 recreated, and it's really shaking him around. If you look at Top Gun Maverick, for example, had a hypersonic flight test at the start of that. He was really getting shaken around a lot. It's mainly the acceleration, right? If they can get the acceleration down and make the plane fly smoothly, it wouldn't necessarily matter, right? You feel, when you take off in a normal plane, you feel a bit of a push back in your seat. But apart from that, unless you experience turbulence, it feels fine, right? So the question would be if they could get those accelerations down low enough that you wouldn't really have the eyeballs ready to sink into your face and things like that.
Yeah, it'd be like riding a roller coaster, wouldn't it? Dr. Chris James, Thank you so much for speaking to us this morning. Absolutely interesting. You're the Senior Lecturer at the Centre for Hypersonics at the University of Queensland in Australia. I would be extremely excited if a Concorde-like plane came back. I would love to ride one. Would you?